right, because we're all breathing the same air, but. Do I need to do something more? So the Zoom people are on? Oh, we just can't see them. Got it. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May 14th, 2020 Budget Committee meeting for Washington County and the Service District for Lighting Number 1. For the sake of our Budget Committee members on Zoom, thank you very much for joining us. I believe there are 2 of you, and what we'll do for your benefit is go around the room first and introduce ourselves so you can recognize our voices, and then we'll go from there. So,
Karen Bolin, I'm on the Special District for Lighting Number 1 committee.
this is Chair Catherine Harrington, so you can recognize my voice.
Jerry Woolley, District 4 Commissioner.
Pam Treese, District 2 Commissioner.
And Jennifer Burkhart, we can see you on Zoom. Would you like to say hello?
Mute myself. Hi, I was muted. Sorry about that. Jennifer Burkhart, glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And it looks like we have Commissioner Roy Rogers.
Hi, good evening.
Good to see you. All righty, that is everyone that we have here in attendance for our Budget Committee meeting tonight. Perhaps others will join us later. So with that, we're going to get started. So the one question that I didn't ask you to speak about when we just went around round robin is how long you've been on the Budget Committee. I'll start. This is my 2nd year as a member of the Washington County Budget Committee. Who wants to go next?
My 2nd year.
My 2nd year as well.
I served a term as ESPD, finished 2 years of that, and now I'm on for the Special District Lighting, so I'm in my 2nd term.
How about you, Jennifer?
So I have passed, this is my first day here. I've lived in Washington County for a number of years, served on, or actually passed different budgets for a couple cities and counties over the years.
Well, thank you very much for serving on this Budget Committee. And Commissioner Rogers, how about you? How long have you been on the Budget Committee?
All of those combined plus a few.
Yeah, I think it's what, your 36th budget year?
Correct?
Were you on the Budget Committee before you were a commissioner?
No, I was on, it was Mayor of City 12, and so I was on there for about 7 years.
Very good. All righty. Well, if we go to the next slide, this is our agenda for this evening. We've just done number 1, and we're going on to go to number 2. We'll have a slide on that in a moment. This year, we have a new addition. We're living in very unique times, as demonstrated by all the people in the room who are wearing fabric face coverings. So we have a joint effort going on between Clean Water Services and Washington County to help better inform us about what we might have to face in the future ahead. So we have Eco Northwest, a very reputable econometric firm here with us tonight, so we'll get a brief presentation there. Then we'll turn things over to our staff, and our county administrative officer will take us through the budget message and the major themes. Then we'll really roll up our sleeves and get into the budget presentation and the Service District for Lighting number 1 budget presentation. And whether you know it or not, Committee Member Bolin, you're on both committees.
Okay.
Yep,
Lucky
it's a
me.
combined committee. Then we'll go over next steps and questions.
Okay.
So if we might, go to the next slide, please.
Madam Chair, you have Commissioner Scouten on Zoom as well.
Oh, hello there, Commissioner Scouten. Welcome. It's good to have you. Could you say hello to the group? Are you on mute?
Can you hear us, Commissioner?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Not yet. We can now. Would you like to introduce yourself and answer the question of how long have you been on the Budget Committee?
I've been on the committee for 20 years now. And I represent the Beaverton, Lower Cooper Mountain area on the county board. And my apologies for just being a little late, but it's been a very, very full day. And I had to scramble to find the Zoom connection here on my iPad, but I got there. So welcome, everyone. And I look forward to tonight's presentations.
No worries, you haven't missed anything appreciable with regard to the budget.
That's good. Thank you.
But you are here just in time for our very first action. And this is the opportunity where I get to hand over the gavel for the meeting. Longstanding tradition is that the chair of the Budget Committee is usually one of our lay members of the committee. We are fortunate to have two of you tonight. So either Karen or Jennifer, would either of you like to step up to the plate and grab the proverbial pen, so to speak? It's pretty easy because the agenda's all laid out for you. You just have to help us get through, facilitation of questions.
Madam Chair, you also have KS Van Katterman on Zoom as well now.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, KS, for joining us. Would you like to say hello, introduce yourself, and answer the question of how long you've been on our Budget Committee?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, and we could see you too.
Oh, great. Hi, my name is K.S. Venkatraman. I am the Director for Artificial Intelligence Computing at NVIDIA Corporation. I also serve on the State Governor's Board for Workforce and Talent Development, and I am a resident of Hillsborough. This is my second session attending the Budget Committee.
Great. Well, that means we have three of you who are all vying for the title of being the chair of tonight's Budget Committee. Well, for the full extent of the Budget Committee's work. Which of you would like to be nominated? Oh, darn. Are you telling me I have to keep this proverbial pen?
I would
If no one volunteers, I could go.
You want a motion for that?
I would love a motion for that.
I move that Commissioner Harrington continue to be the
Oh, no,
leader.
KS said he would serve.
Oh, he would, okay.
Did I hear that correctly?
Can I still make a motion?
Yes, you can.
I move that we allow Commissioner Harrington to continue leading the meeting tonight.
Oh,
And if I have a second, I could speak to that.
Second.
I second.
I think, given that I'm here and the two of you are there, it would be nice to have somebody visually to lead the meeting, and she's done a fine job so far, and I'd like to see her continue.
well, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. The motion carries with, I haven't counted, 7-1. Okay,
Moving on.
I have the proverbial pen.
The only caveat is we have to be done by 8:29.
Okay. You heard it here first. Okay, there you go. All righty, so next we need to review and adopt the budget hearing procedures. Jack Liang, would you like to take us through the procedures?
I'd be happy to, Chair. The Washington County and Service District for Lighting #1 budget hearing procedure first of all, the Budget Committee consists of the Board of Commissioners and a lay member, Karen Bowling, Jennifer Burkhart, James Knowlton, Rachel Tweedy, and K.S. Venkaraman. The May 14th, 2020 committee meeting includes a budget transmittal presentation by the County Administrative Office and Support Services Finance Division. The Budget Committee is a local government's fiscal planning advisory committee. Any member may be elected by the committee as its chair. The role of the Budget Committee includes, according to RS 294, as the budget committee meeting is to receive the budget message and the proposed budget document. As a budget hearing, provide member of the public with an opportunity to ask questions and ask questions about and comment on the budget document. Approve the budget as submitted by the budget officer or as revised by the budget committee. The budget document as approved by the budget committee shall specify the ad valorem property tax amount or rate for all funds. So we have the proposed budget document also posted online. The web address is included in the procedure, as well as questions can be directly to me, Jack Liang, the Chief Financial Officer, with my email address and phone number listed. The first opportunity for public testimony is the May 27th, 2020 budget hearing. A second opportunity is scheduled for the June 16th Board of Commissioners meeting, which is a date for formal budget adoption. The May 27th public hearing will be formatted as follows. The staff presentation and then budget overview is the first item, and then upon completion of the budget overview, the Budget Committee Chair will offer opportunities for Budget Committee questions and public testimony by functional area. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person, except for representatives from regional and community-based organizations, where testimony is limited to 10 minutes per organization. For each functional area, the Budget Committee Chair will first solicit Budget Committee questions. Upon completion of the Budget Committee questions, the Budget Committee Chair will solicit public testimony. Upon conclusion of questions and testimonies, the Budget Committee Chair moves to the next functional area on the agenda and then repeats the same process. A separate public testimony time is scheduled for individuals and community-based organizations at 8:15, time certain, and any public testimony from community-based organizations regarding funding requests for fiscal year 2021 will be scheduled at this time as well. Upon completion of the budget review process, a motion and a vote are required by the Budget Committee to approve the Washington County budget, including any changes by the Budget Committee and levy taxes. A separate motion and vote are required by the Budget Committee to approve the Service District for Lighting Number 1 budget, including any changes by the Budget Committee. Does the Budget Committee have any questions about the procedure?
I do not.
Not at this time.
About the rest of you on Zoom, Commissioner Scoutner, Commissioner Rogers?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess in a way, I'm really happy to serve as the chair of the Budget Committee because this is our first year doing this with Zoom, and I try to be pretty ordered about seeing if there are any questions, and this way I don't feel guilty about passing the buck to somebody else. So, I guess I'm relieved to be able to do it. For those of you who are listening on Zoom or watching the YouTube channel, because we have both of those opportunities tonight, as our Chief Financial Officer, Jack Liang, expressed, if you have questions on the budget, you can email those to him at finance_budget@co.washington.or.us. Or if you have questions you would like to call him on, please dial 503-846-8756. Now, I think we need to adopt these procedures. Do we have a motion to adopt the budget hearing procedures for the Washington County Budget and Service District Lighting Number 1, Service District for Lighting Number 1?
Move to accept the
Motion?
motion. Thank you. Good.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 7-1. And just to double check, has James Knowlton or Rachel Tweedy joined us?
They have not, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you. They are absent. All righty. Well, next, we are going to have a great new presentation, and one of our, the interim assistant county administrator, Sia Lindstrom, is going to give us a little background and introduce our speaker. Thank you, Sia.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. I appreciate that. I have the pleasure of introducing tonight a guest speaker. We don't usually have guest speakers for our budget committee meetings, but we are in unprecedented times. We have the challenge of putting together a budget in the middle of a pandemic. And we are trying to wrap our arms around what the fiscal impacts will be for us as an organization and as a community. Things are moving fast. We were approached recently by Mark Jockers and Diane Taniguchi-Dennis from Clean Water Services about partnering on a very innovative project. John Toponia and his staff at Eco Northwest have been doing a number of really interesting studies across the region and the state about COVID and the impact, economic impact on our housing markets. And Clean Water Services folks had the really brilliant idea of asking them to do a similar study focused on Washington County. And so they have been moving fast. I have never seen a study come together this fast, I will tell you that. And we are fortunate to have John here tonight to walk us through the results of his study on the economic impacts so far, as we know them, of COVID-19 in Washington County. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John. I'm going to step back from the table so he can step up, and hopefully staff is going to get his PowerPoint presentation rolled up for him.
Thank you and welcome, John. And unfortunately, we do not have a clicker for you to use tonight since this is all being done via Zoom. And so if you simply say next, our great video experts, Chuck and company will advance. Or if you need to go in some other direction.
No, that sounds great. Sounds great. Well, thank you. And as you said at the outset of this meeting, these are unusual times. I think the last time I gave a presentation broadly about the economy in person, the unemployment rate was 3.5%, and we were still in the longest economic expansion in U.S. history. That's not where. Exactly, and that is not where we are today. I would also say, with respect to the pace of this work, and a number of you have already seen versions of this presentation. If you saw them 2 weeks ago, they are outdated. Things are moving that fast. We just had, more announcements of additional claims for unemployment this morning, And as you can tell, as I was driving over here from Portland, roads were filled up going in the other direction. So things are changing, and they're changing rapidly, and we're trying to keep an eye on them. So I've got this paper presentation in front of me, so I can keep track of where I am, and I see the slides. You have the slides in front of you, or is there not one there?
Slides are supposed to be projected behind us too, aren't they? Oh, they're going up.
Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. Well,
You'll get to see them
up to that point. So we can go ahead and advance here, just with 4 broad questions that we've attempted to answer. First one is, how has economic activity in Washington County changed since January? How and to what extent does the CARES Act, that federal government $2.2 trillion package, mitigate the near-term economic damage? What's the economic outlook in late 2020 and early 2021 with the virus in the background? And how does the economic outlook affect the county's outlook? And I'm just going to do a brief touch there because we haven't gone deep into that. And folks here in the county, that's going to be the whole rest of your meeting, I would imagine. So, well, let's go and take this journey. So there's the first question, and now we can advance. So here, a fascinating tool just released last Friday by a think tank at Harvard University, Opportunity Insights. It's headed by Raj Chetty, future Nobel laureate, and a lot of funding from the Gates Foundation on this. What they have done over the course of the last month or so was get as much real-time data on credit card processing and aggregate job posting data sets and things of that nature, and take a look at what's going on all over the United States, down to metro and county level. And so here's what they're showing with respect to how consumer spending has changed since January, and in a variety of different categories. So not surprisingly, you can see leading into the public school closure, a huge spike in grocery spending. And you might remember the toilet paper shortages and things of that, exactly. And then that sort of cooled down. But then you can see, and it's before the stay-at-home order goes into place, that consumer spending starts to decline. And these are statewide numbers here. We're down about more than a quarter, 27.5%, with the restaurants and the hotels taking the big hit at almost 70% down. Open table reservations nationally went to zero. So now if we go to this next chart, you can see data for Washington County specifically. So follows the Oregon trend pretty closely, and a little bit further down than Oregon. That might be explained by the fact that this county is a little bit more affluent. So there's more discretionary income to fall off than there is as the state as a whole. You can sort of see how things are sort of moving from mid-April up to May 7th there. We'll go to the next slide. This will give you a feel, these are Google mobility reports. You can also pull these off of Apple as well, just to give you a flavor of how activity has been different in Washington County relative to Sweden, where there has been no stay-at-home order at all. So retail and recreation down 47% in Washington County, only 18% in Sweden. Grocery and pharmacy down 15% here compared to 3% down in Sweden. We'll go to the next one. Transit had a sizable fall off in Sweden, but even more so here in Washington County. And then travel to workplace. So looks like the Swedes probably following similar patterns of not going into offices if they don't have to go into offices in ways that are similar to here. So that's just to give you a feel for how people are moving around. We'll go to the next slide. Now we're getting into data on these unemployment claims, and these lag some, as you have seen in the press. Lots of claims made. The state has struggled with an outdated processing system to get those claims processed. So it's only when those claims are processed do we know where they came from with respect to place or industry. But these initial findings, which are now sort of at least a couple weeks out of date, are nonetheless showing the pattern that is prevalent here and in most places in the country. So big impacts there at the top, at the lowest wages, those median hour wages of less than $15 an hour, not surprisingly in the food preparation and serving. This economic event is unlike anything this country has ever experienced. We have been through many different kinds of recessions and one depression. Those have always been caused by some problem inside of the economy itself, be it an asset bubble or overproduction in industrial sectors, or those issues that would sort of build up inside of the economy. This is literally a problem that was fully outside of the economy, a public health crisis where the government came in and essentially put the economy into a coma intentionally for public health reasons, unprecedented. And I sort of pause there to just say that food preparation and serving was at the center of that the leisure and hospitality sectors where there is a lot of social gathering was right in the middle of that response. The next category down, this healthcare support, some surprises and actually some news coverage on just how widespread the layoffs were in the healthcare sector. I think we were all sort of just mentally in our minds thinking, well, this is a public health crisis, so the healthcare sector should be very busy. And parts of it were, actually not so much in Oregon, because thankfully the coronavirus didn't hit us in the way that it did in New York and Detroit and New Orleans, et cetera. And there were big parts of the healthcare sector of elective surgeries or routine physicals and the like that were closed. And so big parts of those physician groups and hospitals, et cetera, temporarily laid off during that period. So a big hit there. It's a big sector, and it took some big hits. Construction and extraction and the arts, design, and entertainment, you can see in that next level down. Construction, the governor allowed to remain open with social distancing. You would see even more layoffs if you're in California or in Washington. And hopefully a sector that will rebound a little bit more as things continue to reopen. And then these sectors at the bottom, management, healthcare practitioners, legal, et cetera, the least affected to this point. A lot of office-based work that lended itself to remote work, et cetera. So let's see what we have on the next slide here. This will give you a feel again with these sort of backward-looking claims a little bit. This is the unemployment claims by county compared to the labor force, and you can see where Washington County sits there in the green section, sort of between Baker and Benton County, sort of on the lower end of the scale in terms of the impact up to that point. And that's where we would expect you to stay during this period. If you look way to the left, Lincoln, Clatsop, Deschutes, Coos, Crook, et cetera, all counties that are tourism dependent or have sizable tourism-related activity. Think of all those restaurants, all those gift shops, all those little curio shops, et cetera, closed during this period, and that's a big hit for those communities. Now, if you look at these percentages, and this was as of mid-April, there's still a lot missing in these, so that is deceptively low. If you look at the statewide average of about 10%, that's not where Oregon was in this case, and you can sort of see this in the next slide, where we go through, and this is for Washington County specifically, and so this is using that same data. The blue percentages are all those that are officially processed and that the state is accounting for. So these are, you could sort of think of them as unemployment rates by industry. And then what we did is we guessed, if you took all the unprocessed claims and allocated them in a way that we thought made sense and put them on top, this is closer to where you would have been circa April 18th. So the county at that point at about 15% unemployment with those industries you can see, accommodation and food, arts, entertainment, not surprisingly the ones on the left-hand side. Then you hit that healthcare sector and then into retail construction. So all relatively intuitive there.
So do you have a sense of, like, is processed claims 200,000 and unprocessed is 500,000? I mean, what's the ratio here?
Well, it's roughly what you're seeing. Yeah,
I've seen
roughly.
percentages, but I want to know numbers.
Oh, numbers. We can get you the numbers.
I was just wondering if it was like a 2-to-1 ratio, and we've got a lot more coming.
Oh, well, as of that time, they were about evenly split. As
50-50.
50-50.
Because if you're guessing, I'm trying to wonder,
Yeah.
are you guessing on a big 2-to-1
No.
ratio, or what are you guessing on?
Yeah, well, we know the number of unprocessed claims that came in from this county. We just don't know which industry, so we were just allocating them across those industries.
Okay.
And where we had to do a little bit of statistical magic is you saw more claims outside of food and sort of the entertainment sector the longer this went. So those initial claims hit the restaurants and the theaters first, and then you started to see the ripple effect.
Education and healthcare.
Exactly.
Got it.
So we'll head now to the next question. We're going to come back with some economic numbers for Washington County. So how and to what extent does the CARES Act mitigate the near-term economic damage? And I'm just going to touch on a couple of components of it, have plenty of other information if you have questions about the CARES Act. But this was the big, I think they call it Phase 3. There were a couple of bills that passed before. This is the $2.2 trillion package that passed. So why don't we take a look. One of the signature pieces here on the next slide are these recovery rebates. And so what you're seeing here is household income across the bottom, and then the aggregate amount of money that flowed into those household bins, sort of going up the vertical axis there. So by our estimate, about $450 million of recovery tax rebate money came into Washington County. It's probably still trickling in, but it's mostly here, I think, at this point. 87% of households were eligible. The average rebate was about $2,300. It is skewed toward the middle class. You've got sort of the peak of this sitting sort of between the $40,000 and $75,000 household income. It is designed that way to sort of taper off. Married households would not receive any of this if they're up at sort of the $175,000, $200,000 household income level. So that was, a big shot. Another shot of comparable size we can see on this next slide, which is still in play and will be in play at least until the end of July, are these unemployment benefits and supplements to Oregon's state unemployment. So what you're seeing here, these are state level data, but play out similarly in Washington County. If you were, had an earnings profile at $22,500, you can see that state unemployment would have kicked you a check a little bit over $250 a week. It would have replaced 65% of your income. What the federal government has done is said, we're going to give you an extra $600 a week through the end of July as long as you're unemployed. And so for somebody at that level, their replacement ratio is twice what they were earning. So it's, again, very progressively designed to push money to individuals at the lower income levels. At a $62,500 level, you can see the state unemployment would have got you about 50% whole. Federal government's coming in with the other 50%, and that's how it goes on. You have heard commentary, and you will hear it in the press, that these payments may slow down sort of return to work if for any variety of reasons. Individuals may be struggling with childcare and or may be fearful of going back to work, and they have an unemployment benefit that for the time being is making them whole or even better than whole. So that is just something that the economy is having to work through at this point, and that employers are having to work through as they proceed going forward. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Plenty of other features that we could talk about and happy to answer questions about, but I would characterize the Federal CARES Act as this. It is the largest stimulus/disaster relief package in modern U.S. history. It's bigger than the initial response of the New Deal. It's far bigger than the response under the Great Recession in ARA, and has other features. I mean, the county itself has received funds to fund its coronavirus response. The state has received some funds. There's a whole system of business and small business responses in it. I would characterize it as in proportion to the size of the problem. And it's synced well with a moderate to aggressive 3-month social distancing strategy. So if you were sitting where Congress was sitting when they passed this, and they said, if we want to fund this country through the end of a social distancing push, and I think at the time they passed it, they probably thought, and at the end of that, the economy's going to be okay and reopen, that this would have done the bill. This is robust. It attempts to cover many bases, low-income, gig economy workers, senior people with disabilities, small business, liquidity, et cetera. The problem is we'll get further into this, the economy is not going to open. This is not a V-shaped recovery unless somehow the virus does magically disappear. So that brings us to this question. What's the economic outlook in late 2020 and early 21 with the virus in the background? So let's take a look at this. And if there were one slide that I would hold on to, this is the one. This is the fight right now. This was polling by DHM Research, and they asked the question, when do you expect to safely return to certain activities? In how many months? When are you going to be comfortable to walk into a barbershop and get a haircut or a salon? 2 months. This was taken, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. When are you going to be comfortable walking into a restaurant and dining with other people? 3 months. When are you going to be walking into a shopping mall? 4 months. How about traveling on an airplane? They didn't ask if it was the middle seat or not. 5 months. Attend a major sporting event, 6 months. This is the economic challenge. It really has almost a little bit less to do with what the governor or public health officials tell us we can do. People are watching the news. They can watch the news. They can look at the infection rates. They can look at the death rates, and they're making their own assessments. And so think of all the economic activity related to all those activities. If people are voluntarily stepping away from those, the economy is going to continue to struggle and underperform relative to where it was. And you can already see that in numbers on this next slide, which is Georgia. And again, from this economic tracker that we were talking about, 2 things to look at. They closed they issued a stay-at-home order on April 3rd. I think that's right, if I can read that from here. But you can see in Georgia that their consumer activity fell long before the governor told them to stay at home, right? Nobody told them to stay at home. Nobody told them to stay out of restaurants or not go to the barber or not go to movies. They had the right to do it up to that point, but consumer activity was plummeting. And then you can see on April, 24th, they reopened their economy and everybody was talking about it, et cetera. To this point, you don't see a lot of bump in their consumer spending. And if you just read the popular press and you go look at their restaurants and their barbershops, et cetera, it's quiet. Folks are quietly trying to assess, am I feeling comfortable? Am I feeling safe going back out and interacting with people? So that's that one. Next slide. Here's just any number of different charts that you might be looking at to just try to get a feel for how deep and how long are we in this. And so this is sort of the consensus forecast of the economists that are surveyed by the Wall Street Journal. Just pulled this yesterday. So you can sort of see where the CBO, Congressional Budget Office projection of GDP was headed as of January 2020. And here you can sort of see in that blue line where the GDP trend was during the financial crisis. And then here you can, then in this blue sort of check mark, or some people might call it a Nike swoosh shape, you can see this deep fall in 2020, a sharper rebound than you saw in the financial crisis. But you get out to 2022, quarter one, and these economists still don't have us back to that original trend from January of 2020. If you put this in terms of unemployment rates, as we sit here today in the state of Oregon, we're probably in the neighborhood of 20% unemployment, maybe a little bit higher than that. And we will likely, and that's in line with the nation, we will likely trend down over the course of this year and settle in the very low teens, 11 or 12%. And then the forecast by the Congressional Budget Office is that we'll still be hanging around 10 at the end of 2021. And again, it all has to do, all of this could change with improvements on the public health front. Bill Connerly, longtime economist out of Lake Oswego, said early in this process, he says, If you want me to tell you about how the economy is going to do, tell me what the progress is on the public health front. If tomorrow somebody were to say there's a therapeutic that has been developed short of a vaccine that will prevent people from getting the worst outcomes of coronavirus, and that therapeutic is disseminated and people can take it, et cetera, boom, you'd have a lot more people moving out, and we'd feel safer around one another. If, once a vaccine is developed and manufactured and disseminated and all that kind of stuff, then we've won. And it's all just sort of a matter of time. So that's the road ahead. We'll go ahead, and I think we go to the last. Oh, and so here are our estimates of economic output impacts, wage impacts, unemployment, and so this gets your unemployment numbers finally. I've got one for you there. And then estimated unemployment rate at 3 different points in time. So this first column with the green is sort of our best guess as of May 7th as to where we are today. $469 million of reduced economic output, $169 million in reduced wages, 43,900 unemployed, and an estimated unemployment rate of about 15% in Washington County as of May 7th. That middle column is just looking at the process claims, so we'll get rid of that one. And then on the right-hand side is our best attempt to sort of look at those national data and look at Washington County's performance relative to the nation and its economic, its sort of industrial composition, and guess where you might be at the end of the year. So 150 or 514 lost output, 178 in wages, 39,000 still employed, hanging in and around a 12% unemployment rate. Probably doing a little bit better than the nation. You did overperform on unemployment over the course of this last expansion, and in the financial, that was not the case back in 2001. That was a tech bust, and you've got a heavy tech portfolio around here. But the financial crisis didn't hit you as hard. You were doing better throughout the expansion. This is not an especially leisure hospitality dependent. I mean, you've got your stuff, but it's not the coast and it's not downtown Portland. Not quite as heavy in that portfolio that's right at the center of this problem. So that was our most sophisticated math of this presentation. Then now, just a light touch here on how does economic outlook affect the county's fiscal outlook, and we will continue to sort of feed our economic thoughts and thinking in collaboration with staff to look at this going forward. I was just going to make a few comments here. This is just a tree map of your whole budget. Obviously, the big blue one there is the property tax, and we'll talk through that a little bit. If you're in a recession, you have to pick one of the 2 big taxing vehicles in the state of Oregon, the property tax or the income tax. Take the property tax. It's just by design. It has more stability to it for mechanical reasons of the law. There are all kinds of little economic puzzles in here that we could talk about. You've got little lodging pieces that are obviously not going to do well at all. You've got liquor related revenue that is probably stable. They've lost money in the restaurants, but they've more than made up for it with more drinking at home. There are some PERS reimbursements in there, which I'm guessing are sort of side account returns, maybe because returns were doing so well. Anything that has the word PERS on it doesn't have a good outlook associated with at this moment. I mean, that won't show up instantaneously because of the way they do their rate setting. it'll probably be, 2023 before these financial results of this year show up in rates. But boy, unless the market starts to come back, that's going to be very, very problematic. So just stepping through, we'll go ahead and take a peek at, this is state level performance of property and income taxes indexed to the year 2000 level in Oregon. So you can sort of see how property taxes, even in a huge financial downturn, housing downturn of 2008, 9, 10, 11, they were flat, but they didn't fall. By contrast, you can sort of see just what a hit the income tax took over that period of time, sort of started to climb its way back and try to get back, give it a couple more years, it would have probably got back to the property tax line. But now it's going to take another turn. So that's property taxes at the state level. If it's the same sort of story in this next slide, which just shows you why that is. This is just the comparison of real market value and assessed value for real property in Washington County. And through the property tax limitation calculations, you get that 3%. There's such a gap that has grown between AV and RMV over time that even some pretty big hits to your RMV don't threaten the AV. So that's good for stability purposes. You've got all kinds of other reasons you might want to make some reforms to property taxes, but for now, you can be thankful for the stability. And let's see here, and then we'll just end on this one. All of that said, I've got all these sort of points on housing, and we did, as Sia said, we did go deeper on housing. We have a whole presentation, and my colleague Mike Wilkerson would be happy to come out because he could talk about housing all night if you'd like to listen to him. Not tonight. But again, both the nature of the property tax system is going to buffer this, but we don't expect the same kind of housing market collapse that we had last time. The banks are in better position. The Federal Reserve Bank has come in to back up the credit markets very significantly. There's just a housing market in much better shape. We've learned the lessons of the last downturn in that respect, and so not anticipating quite as a severe response there. Caveat there on the bottom with respect to commercial property values, more at risk. There we don't have a lot of intelligence yet on what's going to happen. But clearly with a lot of people having been trained on how to work remotely and at home, as new leases for office space and the like come up, I would imagine companies are going to be thinking a little bit differently about, do they really need an on-site presence for every employee that they have, or could they do that a little bit more efficiently? But that's going to take some time to play out. So with that, happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, how about this? We'll check in with our colleagues on Zoom first, and I'll just do a roll call check-in if I might. KS, did you have any questions? Oh, and please note that each of these slides is numbered, so if you have a question on a particular slide, either give us the title or the number. That would be excellent.
Okay. I have one question. Thank you for all the data. I don't remember the slide number, unfortunately, but I'd like to understand what percentage of Washington County's economic output is attributed to consumer spending. Do you have that figure?
Not off the top of my head, but,
okay.
But we can go dig into the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It's embedded in those numbers that we showed in the one chart.
Okay.
But clearly, consumer spending was what was driving that economic expansion at the end. It wasn't business investment and the like. It really was. The consumer was confident and kept that expansion going as long as it did. And this clearly just put a full break on that.
Right. Thank you.
How about you, Jennifer? And I hope everyone's okay if I use first names, if possible.
That's perfectly fine. The question I have is, I know that Washington County, I believe, has a 96% tax collection rate. How does the current climate that we're in affect that? Should someone look to maybe reduce that for a temporary amount of time?
So you might be suggesting less rigorous enforcement?
Not rigorous enforcement, but the fact that maybe some people may not be high on paying their taxes or not able to this year. And what I'm saying is that it's currently been at 96% for, I guess, the last few years. What would happen if that rate, goes down to like a 93% collection rate?
Right.
Would you like Jack or?
I'd be happy to chime in on that, Jennifer. If I hear your question correctly, I think you are wondering if we have made any internal considerations or changes in terms of our financial projections into the revenue. And this is really where I wish I had more time to collaborate with John, because he definitely has a lot of data in this area. But we, in this year's budget, which you are about to review, we definitely incorporated a 2% drop from that 96%, assuming that there may be a 2% drop from that, so going down to 94 instead of 96%. And apparently, John can tell me that this is a conservative or optimistic. And we definitely see that back in 2008, 2009 as a partial trend. That's not to say that it's going to happen exactly like the last time in terms of collection rate, but so far that's the best estimate that we can come up with for now. Obviously, we will monitor that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I would say, looking back to the performance in the Great Recession is a place to start. And I've seen how, any number of other budget shops have looked back. We are starting to, we've unleashed a recession of that degree of severity. And the complicated piece is that you have that underlying slowdown in economic activity that is now just a generic recession, and social distancing sort of overlaid on top of it, right? Because you have a global slowdown because everything's slowed down, and so now orders into manufacturers, and it's rippled into just a general economic slowdown. Consumers are spending less, et cetera. And then in addition to that, you've got 15 to 20% of the economy in that leisure and hospitality sector that is secondarily disadvantaged by the fact that people are just scared to use it or have a threat with the virus to engage with it. So I do think, going back in the first instance, saying how did we fare in that Great Recession, and then trying to think, does this social distancing and the extra impact on leisure and hospitality add to that in some way and make it even worse?
So would it be fair to say that in November, we don't know what our collection rate will be on property taxes, but between now and November, if people aren't working, we'll be hit harder by income tax loss than we would be by property tax loss? Wouldn't it be a higher dollar figure?
Yeah, you've got a very severe and abrupt impact, and you'll hear about that on May 20th with the state on income taxes.
So any state monies that have been promised to Washington County, we may or may not get.
I think you'd have to look, if you have funds that are discretionary in nature from the state, discretionary grants that they have decisions of how big they are, et cetera, I would keep an eye on those funds pretty closely. Now, on the other hand, they do have the ability, they do have the coronavirus relief fund monies, which I think the county has received as well, that they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with us from the state level. And some of that could be shared with.
You can get a bump in the marijuana money.
Well, there you go, right.
Anything else, Jennifer?
No, not at this time. Thank you for answering my question.
How about you, Roy Rogers, Commissioner Rogers?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm having a bit of difficulty on my end with picking up voices, but fascinating conversation. We could spend hours, and I could probably generate about 20 or 30 questions very quickly. But overarching, and this is to our speaker, a lot of this is based obviously on models that you're looking at and projections that we don't have a second phase. It's projections that the economy is going to be reacting somewhat similar to what it's done in the past. That the business structure that we have in Washington County is going to remain the same. But my question to you, if you had to put your entire fortune, your house, your car on the line, what would you do as far as planning for a budget? What would be your points that you would stress and say, this is what I would really do, this is what I'd really watch, this is how I'd spend the money, this is how I would take and react, and what would my contingencies and my fallback positions be?
Yeah, great question. So I think what I would do in that case is, I mean, you've sort of seen a flavor for the on the one chart of that check mark, and just how broad those guesses are. You know, that those red bands are sort of the range of possible outcomes. 10th percentile, 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th percentile. Were I in your position, I think I would. There we go. I would forecast, forecast sort of a baseline positive and a pessimistic, or an optimistic and a pessimistic, and probably budget around someplace between the 40th percentile outcome, and then maybe have a period of time in the future where you would say, look, if things are going well, we'll reassess. But I think be somewhat conservative. Obviously, the baseline, I think the baseline is going to be a pretty tough march. But if you bet a little bit below that baseline, and then maybe reassess it if that's a possibility mid-year, see how things are going. This is an event unlike any event that I can remember, where what I thought was true 3 weeks ago is not true today. And if I came here 3 weeks from now, I guarantee you, many of these charts will look different. When we started this in March, Ben Bernanke, the former head of the Fed, said, he thought this was just going to be an extended snowstorm. It's sort of like an extended snowstorm, and that you would have a V shape, and that probably by August or September, the economy would be in pretty good shape again. He's a pretty smart guy. Good economist, scholar of the Great Depression, all of that, and not his fault. But 2 or 3 weeks later, and I think most people have taken the V off of the table, and so this is going to be something where 6 months from now, we're going to have a much better understanding as to whether therapeutics have won approval, whether they've been disseminated, whether does this look like a vaccine is really going to be in play in 2021 or not? So I think the piece of advice is time is your friend, and the more time you can buy to assess and plan, the better position you're going to be in. So use time, and I've given that same advice with respect to those coronavirus relief funds. those have to be spent on by December 31st of 2020. So the first piece of advice is spend every cent of it. And there's plenty of ways to spend it. But the second piece of advice is maybe don't spend it quickly. Wait until you see what the feds do and what's going on in the economy. Let that, this CARES Act is throwing a lot of money into the economy through the end of July. Who knows what the federal government is going to do after that? So I would hold on to some of that until you see how the virus is playing out, how the economy is playing out, and how the federal government is reacting to it.
Commissioner Scouten, Dick Scouten.
No, I'm just, at the moment I don't. I'm just sort of absorbing all this information.
Great.
I guess it's going to be the virus that's going to help explain and determine our economic situation in the coming months. And that's something very different from anything we've ever experienced in anyone's lifetime. So, yeah, at the moment, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. How about here in the room? Karen Bolin, any other questions?
Just the crystal ball, is it going to be fluffy and obscure and just hard to manage for a long time, probably?
Yes. And again, I think it is something where, this is a month at a time, and you learn so much as every month goes by. Every month goes by, we can watch what's going on in every East Asian country that had this first, right? Singapore was the star of this to begin with, and then they blew it. They reopened and in a way that didn't control the infection rate, and their infection rates shot up. By contrast, if you look at Taiwan has moved through, and we can sort of see what they do, try to figure out how much of what they do would be culturally acceptable here in the United States, or try to mimic it in some way, et cetera. But there's so much, and this is the novel coronavirus, right? We've never fought this war before. So all the time, we will learn more about this virus. We will know whether the summer gives us a break or not. All those kinds of things. So the more time you can buy and have some patience in your planning, I think the more efficient are your county services going forward.
I just want to make one comment. I think the bulk of our budget, from my experience, is on our people, staffing. You can't say to someone, yes, you have a job, and then tomorrow you don't. So a lot of our dollars go towards staffing and training. And so we have to, I think as a budget committee, we have to figure out, maybe we have to dig into our contingency, just like families are having to dig into their savings in order to maintain those staffing levels, because I just don't see this county functioning if we have to get rid of staff. And so I want to say that out loud, is I really think we owe it to ourselves to be careful about our choices so that we can maintain our service levels.
Well, and absolutely. So you saw all those other sectors are shedding employment and reduce. If you join them in a big way, for every dollar we take out of government, that's about $1.70 to the economy in a multiplier effect, which is one of the main arguments as to why the federal government has come in as strong as it has, and why the calls are so strong for state and local government revenue support going forward. So yes, there is an economic consequence to austerity.
Thank you.
Commissioner Willie, Jerry.
Well, I'm always intrigued by the stock market, where it seems to do everything in contrast to what we're experiencing. And so we've always been told that it's the leading edge and it's the best indicator of what's coming down the pike. That hasn't actually proven true either, so I'm not sure about all their methods and things, but What do you think? Is the stock market going to continue to bump along there, or are we still in for some troubled times?
Yeah. So I would say that the stock market's forward-looking. All this economic news is backward-looking. Fortunately, the unemployment rate is probably a little backward-looking. It's going to start coming down as the hospitals and the like open up. The stock market's looking out, and I would say at this moment in time is probably a little optimistic. I think, in terms of just how much that the market has returned, just the gains since late March, I think still has this mentality of August, September, October are going to be a little bit more close to normal than reality. You haven't seen the same kind of stock market returns in Europe. They're more pessimistic than this U.S. stock market. So the market has been very encouraged by the aggressiveness of the Fed and their willingness to go in, and by the aggressiveness of Congress. If Congress doesn't keep it up, if we're in August and September and we haven't passed another phase, and if Congress doesn't come in and provide some kind of support for state and local government, and that sector starts to shed employment, I think you see the stock market take a dip. So it's going to be a careful walk and dance through this.
Well, it doesn't seem like the federal deficit has impacted the market at all, which is amazing to me, but
yeah,
we'll have to wait and see on that.
Right. And the big fear is inflation at some point when you have pushed that much money, $2.2 trillion and a $3 trillion deficit in a single fiscal year, which is just, I used to work for the Congressional Budget Office, and it's just sort of mind-boggling. $3 trillion deficit in a single fiscal year. At some point, the worry is there's more money than goods out there, and that you put some upward pressure on inflation. But that probably doesn't happen until we're truly in a recovery post-vaccine, when people are really willing to fully engage, jump on a plane, go travel someplace, go, stay in a hotel, go to the casinos, go to a football game, all of that. I think that's the fact that we're not spending on any of that is going to sort of keep a damper on inflation until.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Commissioner Treese, Pam.
I have a question for your crystal ball.
Okay.
And that is, when you think about the nature of the private sector in Oregon, let's talk about Oregon. We've always been a small business focused state. What do you see the changes in the complexion here? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so you're right. Oregon's got according to SBA, 55% of employment in small businesses compared to a U.S. average in the high 40s. So it is more small business dependent. The reason we didn't get into the Paycheck Protection Program in my CARES Act, that was a big program, and it is trying to keep as many small businesses open and solvent as possible. And the very legitimate worry and concern is when you lose a small business, now you've broken relationships. However many people worked for that small business can't go back there. And so who's going to create those jobs? Some other small business is going to sort of take that market instantaneously, or some big business is going to. So you've disrupted networks, you've disrupted relationships, and you've made it harder for the economy to come back when those employers disappear. Because when one dies, one isn't born instantaneously to sort of take up that slack, which is why Congress, that was the very first thing they came back. When that money ran out in the Paycheck Protection Program, both sides of the aisle came back very quickly to fill it back up. and push more of that money out. It's a challenging program. Echo Northwest is a small business, and we received a PPP loan, and it is a game changer for us. We went in with some degree of resiliency. We had a cash balance, et cetera, but we were not anticipating a global pandemic. So we didn't have enough cash for a global pandemic. And this PPP program sort of gave us the resiliency that I believe we need, to be able to push through into 2021 and hopefully beyond. Lots of small businesses that are not in that good of shape and will struggle again if there isn't more aid or if the economy doesn't return a little bit more quickly than it looks like it will.
On a similar theme with small business, another crystal ball question. We've had the opportunity to see businesses go from having a few employees teleworking to all of a sudden a lot. Not everyone, mind you. There are still face-to-face businesses as well. And I'm trying to lead to your thoughts about, given the prolonged nature of this new normal lasting, if for no other reason than we don't have a vaccine, so there's still risk with regard to safety. Do you see a continuing effect on small business with regard to the lunchtime crowd with restaurants or visits to coffee shops?
Yes.
Any thoughts there?
Absolutely. No, and that's the ripple effect. So yes, absolutely. Folks are going to have to think about any business that was reliant on sort of mass gatherings of people in office buildings coming out at lunchtime and eating in coffee shops and those kinds of things are going to be struggling. The Economist magazine has sort of coined this term, the 90% economy, which is just a shrunken economy for an extended period of time for exactly the reason that you pointed out. That is the ripple effect that happens. I mean, you could give that example. You could give, September 12th in Eugene, there was supposed to be a football game between the Ducks and Ohio State Buckeyes. That would have been a huge boon for that whole weekend. And you can imagine how many hotels, motels, restaurants, et cetera, are sort of counting that in their annual forecast. What's that? I know, and the Buckeyes would have lost. And that was in my crystal ball. So that's right at the heart of the issue. And think about, even if you do open, a restaurant experience is going to be very different. You walk in, you have to be 6 feet apart. You can't be downwind from the air conditioner. Very likely, you're going to have your name taken down so they can contact trace you. The wait staff may come up with gloves. They may take your temperature on the way in. I mean, who knows? And so that's kind of a completely different experience. I might stick with takeout at that point. It's like.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's good to have a future look from an economist so that to the degree that we have options to keep open, that we might be able to keep them open or be nimble, or at least have the opportunity to consider that in our decision-making as a budget committee.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, good luck with your decisions.
Much appreciated.
All righty, we'll move on then to the next item on our agenda, which is the fiscal year 2020-21 major themes. And I think now...
Chair Hinton, we actually have an intermission scheduled at this point if the Budget Committee would like to take an intermission.
I see, you were going by time as opposed to placement in the agenda. I didn't see it.
Yes, sorry, we only included in the PowerPoint slides and failed to include that in the agenda.
Oh,
Apologies.
cool, great. Thank you for pointing that out. So everyone online, as well as in our viewing audience and in the room, will be taking a 10-minute break. So we will return here at 7 p.m. promptly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So based on your experience, you think 829 is doable? Doable? Okay, let's see.
She said it.
Time to rock and roll.
Okay, folks, it's time to rock and roll, as Karen said.
That's right.
So we are now picking up with our agenda at item 4, fiscal year 2020-21, major themes. So take it away, administration.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get started, I just want to mention that between 7:30, 8 o'clock, somewhere in that point, we will do a time check with the committee to see how much more we want to go tonight, because as I think you know on your calendars, we did set aside another meeting because we knew the presentation from Echo Northwest would take a while. So we'll do a check-in with everybody to see what your desires are at that point.
We do know that we will adjourn by 8:29.
I heard that. I'd like to start off, set the scene, if you will, for going through the budget. Instead of just going through my budget message, which you all have there in the document, I'm just, myself and Sia Lindstrom, our Assistant County Administrator, are just going to pull a few pieces out of that message and highlight those. So, and we've called that major themes. The first theme that I'd like to start with is continuity. It's one of the pieces that goes into the budget, into the process, is continuity of service. What is it we need to keep doing, and how do we keep doing it? And that's particularly important in these times when we are really split in terms of what we're doing and what continuity of service means. Because we've got the public health and the EOC, which is right now the main point of our county response to COVID, and the executive orders coming out of the governor's office. So that's a continuity that we have to maintain now and in the budget as we put it together. And along with that comes the task, responsibility of coordinating the reopening of the economy while protecting the public. One of our probably most difficult tasks that we have to do, but it's something that we had to account for as we were putting this budget together. And we've had to work to assure that those impacted the most by the crisis will have the assistance that they need to recover. And that's really, as we call it, that is what we call our equity piece of the process. And you'll hear that theme echoed over and over as we go through this document in many different ways. At the same time as having continuity with those services, we need to maintain our essential functions. It's very important that we keep at least the bare bones, if you will, of the organization operating, because there are a lot of people that depend on that. The community, our employees, and other partners in the state that depend on us doing that. We've had to do that while now practicing physical distancing and now wearing our face coverings, and other protective measures that we've been implementing as we've been working through this crisis. But we've done that so that we can maintain essential services and keep a function going and provide the service that the community needs to keep functioning, even if it's at a very low-key level. Things that are included in that are things such as assessment and taxation. People need to have a way to get documents recorded still. There's still transactions going on that need to be recorded. Of course, we need to make sure people can pay their property taxes, so we've got to have that taken care of. Elections, a very big piece of assessment and taxation, and an essential function that we could not ignore or farm out, if you will. We had to keep that moving, and we are well prepared. The Elections Division has done an excellent job of preparing us for that election next week. So, because we will have people coming in to elections to vote. There are some people that's just how they want to vote. So we've had to prepare for that, figure out how to make that work. And all the other pieces, the number of people that we have to bring in to process ballots, all have to be worked through as a function that we must do. So we have to keep those things going. Another is public safety and justice functions. We can't stop those. We couldn't just close the jail and send everybody home, because we know they wouldn't be on good behavior when we sent them home. So we have to find ways to keep those going. And the Sheriff's Department has been very innovative in the jail sector as well as in patrol and how they're doing that, and still maintaining the safety of the employees and providing that expected service. In the same light, the DA's office and community corrections have done an outstanding job of providing that essential service under these trying conditions. But again, those are pieces that have to go into the budget as well, how we keep those going now and in the future. Another one that maybe we often don't think about, but is animal control. Actually, they probably are getting more calls now than prior to the crisis. So, and they've figured out ways to keep that going and meet the needs of the public. And I'll highlight just a few more, and then we can move on. But permits and inspections. We have worked very hard, and Land Use and Transportation has done an excellent job of making sure that we're still able to provide that service. And they've, again, found some very innovative ways to be able to do that. So it's a piece of maintaining that essential function that we have, that we've got to keep going. Another one is housing. And that is particularly important because that's one of our key pieces helping prevent homelessness for people that are right on the margin. And they've done a very good job of being able to help people that come to their office or call in order to get assistance as we go through this. And then another one that we all are very familiar with are libraries. And again, I think sometimes what we, crisis or whatever is the mother of invention, and I think we're seeing that over and over here. Libraries have found ways to provide service, and actually a lot of them are getting more contacts, I think, than they were prior COVID. So, and the last one I'll mention is parks, and just how important the open spaces are to us now. I think maybe we've got a lot more park fans than we ever had before, because it's one of the few things that people can get out and do, and hopefully meet the social distancing requirements or physical distancing requirements. So those are some of the pieces of continuity that go into putting the budget together and making sure that we can continue to function. And again, it's been even more difficult in the COVID crisis than it has been in the past. And we've had to put together a budget that looks at both ways. So that's part of our theme that we work on. The next piece that I'd like to highlight is the caution that went into this budget. And we had a little bit of that discussion already with the Echo Northwest presentation. But we put this budget together. It was already well put together by the time the impacts of the COVID crisis began to be visible. So that presented a very difficult problem for us, being so far in that it was difficult, if not impossible, to back up. And we did make some adjustments, but the timing was such that we had to decide that we would proceed forward, put together the document, take the allowances that we thought we could to account for what we think might happen as we put it together. And with that, we fully expect a full review of the budget will be necessary in 2 to 3 months. That gives us time to know, hopefully, where things are going, understand the impacts better, and then make adjustments based on that. So that's one of the things that we thought was a backbone for this because of where we were, and actually because even today we couldn't really predict all of the impacts. But we're confident that in 2 to 3 months we should have a better idea. So that's a piece of the budget and part of the caution that we use going into the document. Then Sia will talk a little more on this, but slides got ahead of me, but that's okay. The county is also vulnerable to state cuts in areas of shared services. And again, Sia will talk about that in more depth a little bit later. One thing that we're fortunate for is that we're more dependent on property taxes than other types of revenue. And I think as John highlighted for us a little earlier, that's one of the last revenues to go down to a point that the value, real market value goes below assessed value, which is when it begins to impact us. That's an unfortunate thing because if we look at our neighboring governments, they are more dependent on cyclical travel, those kinds of revenues that have evaporated. So you're seeing the city of Portland, Multnomah County, the Metro, all having to make layoffs and cuts because they're so dependent on what I call gate revenue, ticket revenue. Imagine having a large convention center and having no conventions. I understand their plight, but fortunately, we're not in that same plight. Although we do have some sensitive revenues, such as our transient lodging tax, our share of gas taxes that we get, building permits, and other items that can impact us. So again, that was caution that had to go into how we put this budget together, realizing that it isn't normal times for those, and that we have to have that in the back of our mind as we move forward. The last area of caution that I would like to share are the public safety and library levies. Now, I want to be clear, I think it's understood, but I just want to be clear, those levies expire at the end of the fiscal year we're just going into. So those expire June 30th of 2021. So we have those funds in this budget for this fiscal year. But the big but is if those don't pass, then we've got to start thinking about the what ifs. Now fortunately we have the county plans this out well. We have 2 more opportunities, should we not be successful next week, to make another attempt at the ballot. But it also gives us a year to start doing the what ifs and planning to see what would be the changes. It's significant because the public safety levy provides about 20% of the funding for public safety functions in our budget. The library levy provides about 40% of the funding for the Washington County Cooperative Library Service. So those are both very significant revenue items that, while again, don't impact this budget directly, certainly could impact the budget as we move through the fiscal year. And I think the loss of those funds at some point would require a comprehensive discussion of the county's options and priorities going forward. See you.
Thank you, Steve. Next slide, please. So one of the cautions for the future that Steve discussed was the status of state funding. We heard that from John DePonia as well. This chart shows the interdependence of state and county services across all of our functional areas. Just as the visual here, the green are the state services, the blue are the county services on the bottom. The big red swath in the middle is our shared services. Now, before COVID, we already knew state funding challenges in several areas, most specifically corrections and developmental disabilities. While we expect our local property tax revenue to be somewhat buffered from early damage in the economy, and I think from John, he was quite optimistic, actually, that it would be buffered, state funding is much more exposed given its reliance on income tax. So the state is issuing a revenue forecast on May 20th. We'll have a much better sense of much better insight into what may be coming our direction after that. For now, we just continue to monitor the state funding stability as the economic impacts of COVID become clearer. Next slide, please. So, the pre-pandemic priorities. Steve highlighted these in his budget message, and they've clearly been the priorities of the Board of Commissioners this year. I just want to run through them briefly. One of the things I would say is that these priorities clearly have not changed with COVID. In fact, COVID has actually served to spotlight their importance even more directly. So, first, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The board adopted a comprehensive equity resolution earlier this year. The proposed budget includes the creation of a new Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, along with 5 new staff, and you'll be hearing more about this as we do our deep dive into the budget. Number 2, economic development. Our proposed budget includes the creation of a new economic development program and a new active program manager position. And as you can imagine, with the financial ramifications of COVID and the impact to our community and our local businesses, this function has become even more important. Affordable housing and homelessness is the third one on the list here. Counties, and as Steve talked about a little earlier, the county's commitment to increasing the supply of affordable housing county-wide and addressing the impacts of homelessness is reflected in various funds throughout this proposed budget, including housing services, Office of Community Development, LUT, Land Use and Transportation, and Health and Human Services. We already see some of the stressors placed on these services because of COVID, and as the economic constraints put more people at risk of losing their homes. Finally, transportation. Couldn't complete this list without transportation. The proposed budget includes funding for a robust capital improvement program with 94 projects totaling $125 million, including support for the Southwest Corridor project, a key component of the Get Moving 2020 transportation measure. So you will see all 4 of these priorities woven throughout the proposed budget we're about to walk through. Next slide. This is just a quick overview of the service categories. Washington County, the left column shows the broad range of services that we provide county-wide. The right column shows the municipal services that we provide just in the urban and incorporated area. And for those who can't read the slide, it's namely neighborhood road and street maintenance, enhanced law enforcement patrol, and enhanced code enforcement. Next slide, please. This one is going to be an important one in terms of understanding the structure of our proposed budget. We have 2 types of funds. One are the general fund organization units that are listed there on the left. They're supported by a broad range of revenue sources and are subsidized by the general fund. For these units, we talk about the amount of general fund subsidy they require, which is the difference between revenue and expenditure. For the special fund organization units, they are also supported by a broad range of revenue sources and are segregated specifically for that use. Many, but not all of these units also receive support from general fund dollars, and we call those the general fund transfer. So that's the difference in terminology here. General fund subsidy is for our general fund programs. General fund transfer are for our special funds. Now you'll see on the special fund list, at the very bottom of the list is a fund in red, and that's the CARES Act Fund. This is going to be a new fund created soon by the board. It's to house the $104 million in federal funds we recently received for COVID support, and that will be coming, Jack, in 2 weeks, right?
May 26th is our plan right now.
There you go. So we put it on the list because it's coming. You won't see it in this budget, but it's coming soon. Next slide, please. I asked Jack to leave this one in here. This is an orientation slide, and for the sake of a couple of our new budget committee members, this is just a reminder that we are required to meet local budget law as it's established by the state. Our own charter also defines the board's responsibility to comply with state budget law, to adopt and enforce financial procedures, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and to ensure a 5-year operating and capital budget projection. And then finally, under our county code, the board delegates responsibility for preparing and submitting the budget to the county administrator, which is what we're doing tonight. Next slide. Okay, this is my last slide before we do the deep dive. So the first step in our budget process is to receive requested budgets from the departments across our 5 functional areas. Just a reminder, Steve already mentioned this, but staff had to submit their requested budgets before COVID. And so these budgets are really a pre-COVID look at what the needs of the organization were. As usual, and not surprisingly, the requested budgets came in higher than we were able to fund, and we did have to scale those back, so we provided guidance to the departments on doing that. You will see some of that in the narrative in terms of what we were not able to do. The board-approved budget policy guides our development of the proposed budget. It says that our budgeted general fund reserves will be maintained at a minimum 15% of net general fund revenues with a goal of 20%. Here's a spoiler alert. Some of you know this already. This budget proposes a general fund reserve of 15.01%, which is just inside the minimum level defined by the budget policy. The budget policy also provides departments with direction on budgeting reserves and contingencies in their special funds, dependent on the purpose of each fund. In addition, it provides departmental guidance regarding budgeting for state funding, local option levies, internal cost recovery, grants, etc. That budget policy is in the back of your budget summary document if you'd like to see it. And I have a note here. I'm going to say again what we've already said. The departmental budgets were created before COVID hit. They have not yet been adjusted, but you will see some notes for funding streams that we know will be impacted early by COVID. We'll be reviewing the budgets, as Steve said, over the next 2 to 3 months as the impacts become clearer. Finally, our budget presentation tonight is designed to highlight significant changes in the budget this year to last. This means that not every organization unit will appear in the PowerPoint, but please feel free to ask questions about any org unit in this budget, regardless of whether it appears in our budget, in our PowerPoint or not, okay? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack to start our deep dive into the budget proposal. Yes, please.
Before you do,
Yes.
just since we're not all in the same room, and I want to make sure I'm using good group hygiene, are there any questions for our colleagues who are out in internet land?
Not from that's right.
I'm good.
Jennifer
I'm good.
or KS?
Thanks.
No questions.
Okay, just wanted to check. How about in the room? Everybody okay? They have a chat box to use?
They have a raise your hand function, Madam Chair, and I've also emailed the other 2 commissioners to either email me or raise their hand so I can interrupt and announce any questions you may have.
But when we go from major section to major section, I'll also try to be proactive, just in case. Okay, thank you very much for letting me interrupt.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Thank you, Sia, for the introduction. And I am ready to take everyone get started looking at the total budget and general fund overview portion. So we are finally going to look at some actual numbers tonight. So the total appropriation for this year, if you look at the entire Washington County combined, actually has, I'm referring to the table at the bottom of this slide first, you are actually seeing a slight decrease of 5%. And the total dollar amount of that is close to $65 million. And I'll tell you the entirety of that $65 million is within capital functional area as well as non-operating functional area. And then our operational functional area actually experienced a very modest increase this year when it comes to total budget. If you look at the breakout of our total appropriations, 23%, the pie chart on the left-hand side, 23% is a general fund, and then 77% is a special fund. That's a mixture of our budget. And then looking at the functional area breakdown, which is a pie chart on the right-hand side, the largest portion is actually capital and non-operating. And then we have followed by HHS, which is HHS, Housing, Health, and Human Services. And then followed by Public Safety and Justice, 16%, Land Use and Transportation. General Government is 6%. Cultural, Education, and Recreation is 5%, and non-departmental is less than 1%. So that's the functional area breakdown of our total budget. Next slide, please. And then moving on to the general fund appropriation, which is the majority of the county's discretionary revenue and discretionary resources resides. Again, starting with the table at the bottom, our expenditures increased to 1.56 million this year, which is less than 1%. And then FTE increased 19.37 this year, which is about 2%. So echoing back to Steve's budget message and the introduction of the major theme, you can see that our budget this year is definitely developed with caution and continuity in mind. While Sia mentioned that when the requested budget are submitted, that was before the pandemic situation, the COVID situation. But at the time when the proposed budget are developed, there were actually a lot of caution and COVID-19 related forecasts that's being considered in this budget development. So looking at the chart on the left-hand side, that's our revenue breakdown. The biggest part of our general fund revenue is, of course, taxes, which consists of 38% of the county's general fund revenue. And then departmental revenue includes 18%. Interfund and transfers is 23%. And the part of the tax revenue that's dedicated to MISTIP, Major Street Transportation Improvement Program, and the WCCLS, Washington County Co-op Library Services, consists of 21% of the general fund revenue. And then looking at the expenditures breaking down by functional area, we have the general fund, that's 23%, public safety and justice, which is 31%, and the other major part is the non-operating, is 32%, and housing and HHS is 11%. Land use, transportation, cultural, education, recreation, non-departmental, each consists of about 1%. Now, a very common question I receive about this is why is the land use, transportation, cultural, education, and non-departmental are so small? And the answer is that land use and transportation, cultural and education, and recreation are majority special fund when in their fundings. That's why you see a little disproportion in the general fund appropriation. Next slide, please. So talking about reserve, our reserve for Washington County consists of 4 components together. And as Sia mentioned that briefly, at the bottom, you can see that our projected reserve percentage for fiscal year 2021 is going to end at 15.01%. And the 4 portion of the reserve, the first part is the general fund contingency, which you will find on proposed budget page 218, and that is $1.9 million projected this year. Revenue Stabilization Fund on page 267, that is $11.6 million this year. And then the SIP fund, which is the short for Strategic Investment Program Fund, and you can find that on page 279 of the proposed budget. And the projected fund balance in that fund is $9.86 million this year. And the last but not least portion are actually the expected difference between budget to actual. In essence, is the unspent portion of the general fund operating appropriations. And the county's history has been 6% of that budgeted amount is unspent, and that is come to about $10.2 million. And all in total, our total reserve this year comes to $33.569 million. And compare that to our net revenue, which is $223,582,888. It's come to a 15.01%. Is there any questions so far? All right, next slide, please. This is a general fund reserve percentage trend that we have projected out for the next 5 years. And you can see that it's 17, 18 is actually the year that closed. 17, 18, and 18, 19 are the years that closed. So the solid line represents the actual numbers. And our fund balance ended with 29% and 34.84% respectively for those 2 years. Starting with the year 1920, which is this current fiscal year that hasn't finished yet, and then the 2021, which is the 15.1% that we project for next year. So all of the future years are projected out based on best information available, and those are, you can see that a slowly declining trend as we're trying to control the cost going into the future, trying to project out a possibly constrained revenue stream going into the future. You can see that there's a little bit of a dip into the reserve there. The green line on this chart represents the maximum level of fund balance of the reserve that the board has instructed for management to maintain. And the orange line in this chart represents 15%, which is the minimum level. So for the year of 2021, we are expecting if every point of our projection is on point, we will end on 15.01%. But of course, we will continue to manage, and the actual always coming a little bit differently than projected. And then going into the future years, while that we show that the projection is dipping a little below, dipping quite a bit below the 15% range over there. Of course, the management continue to monitor our actual spending and continue to find ways to mitigate those risks into the future years. So, any questions for this reserve projection chart?
No, I just wanted to share with my colleagues that I've asked our staff a question about the history of the Reserve Stabilization Fund and why the figures, and we'll get to that at some point.
Yes. All right, next slide, please. So our next part is a functional area overview. Now, before we continue on to the next section, Chair Henderson, shall we solicit any question from the Zoom participants? I just realized I didn't ask them for questions.
Colleagues out on Zoom? None. I see none through
No.
Kevin. Okay, thank you.
None.
All right, our next part of the presentation is the functional area overview, and then we will, CEO staff actually will be walking the budget committee through each functional area in details, and I'll pass the mic back to Sia.
Great. Thank you, Jack. Next slide, please. So we now will start walking you through the 5 functional areas of this budget: general government, culture, education, recreation, public safety and justice, housing, health and human services, land use and transportation. We're going to start with general government. Next slide, please. So general government org units are divided into 2 categories. First, I'm going to walk you through the direct services, which are listed in the left column there. It includes the Board of Commissioners, County Admin Office, elections, community engagement, among others. And it's about 1/3 of this functional areas budget. And then I'll turn it over to Aaron to walk you through support services, which includes emergency management, finance, HR, facilities, among others, and is about 2/3 of this functional areas budget. You can see from the charts in the bottom that direct services side of this increases by $2.6 million, or about 11%, to a total of $26 million. And our FTEs, our full-time equivalents, increased by a total of 6.5%. Support services, on the other hand, that Aaron is going to be walking you through, increased by almost $4.3 million, or 8%. For a total of $56 million, and they increased their FTE, or full-time equivalents, by a total of 2. Next slide, please. So direct services. I'm going to start with the County Administrative Office, and there's quite a bit of activity in the County Administrative Office. We're bringing in 2 new program lines to this office. One is for economic development that I mentioned a little earlier, and the other is for communications. And we're consolidating communications from a couple of places in the organization into the County Administrative Office. So there are 2 new FTE and then 1 transferred FTE. So you'll see in the budget summary document, it says 3 new FTE. please realize one of those is a transfer from another part of the organization for the communications consolidation. The two new FTE, one is for an economic development manager and the other is for a new staff assistant to the board starting in January. Assessment taxation is the next, and this is mostly a status quo budget for both assessment taxation and elections. A few things to highlight with A&T. One is they're starting a new in-house lockbox service, which is basically in-house check processing. As banks get out of the business of processing checks, we're doing it in-house. That's going to result in just about a $16,000 increase in expenses. The big news to celebrate in assessment taxation is that our new Orion tax system will be fully implemented this year. This is a project that's been in the works since 2016. It's a major heavy lift by both A&T and ITS staff. And we are very excited about the successful implementation of this new platform. Finally, equity, inclusion, and community engagement. I mentioned earlier the board's action to adopt an equity resolution and create a new Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. The addition of 5 new FTEs, including a new Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, will allow the effective implementation of the direction set by the board in its equity resolution. This budget also includes continued support for the Civic Leaders Program that's currently with Adelante Mujeres and for the long-standing CPO program. And with that, I hand it over to Erin to talk about the other side of general government support services.
Thank you. Yes, support services is another branch of the general government section. It includes the 10 divisions that you saw on the previous slide, and it is becoming established as a formal department, currently reporting to a director and an assistant director, both of whom are in interim positions. Prior to this, the division managers and supervisors reported to the county administrative office. In the proposed budget, the county will hire a permanent support services director. This is a strategic change that is currently and will continue to provide efficiency for county business and service delivery through developed strategic goals for all support divisions. Some other investments occurring with support services this next year include information technology services. This team is providing modernization to the technological capacity in the county. This includes cybersecurity monitoring to mitigate potential risks. ITS supports departmental needs, like Sia just mentioned, such as assessment and taxation's new tax program, and they support several criminal justice data systems. And quite frankly, nothing has rose ITS to the occasion as the COVID-19 pandemic has. They've been an integral part of keeping county business moving through remote access and support for hundreds of employees in the county, which we're truly grateful for. You've heard a little about the Board of Commissioners and County's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion with the formal adoption of the equity resolution earlier this year. It will be important for support services to continue the equity work in coordination and collaboration with the Equity Office, the new Equity Office. 2 clear examples of this will be human resources for recruitment and retention and purchasing for contracts and procurement opportunities. Another important initiative coming out of support services is the Strategic Facilities Plan that will help shape the location, accessibility, and efficiency of county services in the next 5 to 20 years. It is inclusive of both short and long-term goals. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's helped us think about how to be creative and use alternative ways to deliver services to the community. This will continue to create challenges as we work through reopening plans with a focus on safe and effective service delivery to the public. The timeline that had been proposed to the Board of Commissioners for the Strategic Facility Plan has been delayed due to COVID-19, but facilities and support services look forward to resuming this plan as soon as possible. And finally, the sustainability program provides guidance to the organization for developing sustainable practices, education, and training. In partnership with other departments, they've implemented strategies around building efficiency, fleet and fuel use and reduction, and annual transit passes, just to name a few. The program is getting ready to release their annual report for 2019 and give the board an update on their current initiatives and goals. Next slide, please. Are there any questions for general government?
Let's check in the room first. Seeing heads shake no. How about on our crew on the internet? It looks like I have at least a couple of people who are unmuted. Jennifer, would you like to go first?
Yeah, one question I have is on the expense side of this, does this budget or will this budget highlight or break out one-time versus ongoing costs?
Jennifer, this is Sia. Were you looking at a particular piece of the budget?
Well, just you guys had it broken down in just kind of the percentages and the increases. And I was just, wondering if it would be broken down, so that we can see if there's anything that is going to be an ongoing cost,
Uh-huh.
versus a one-time.
Yeah, I would say in general, most of the costs related to personnel are ongoing in one way or another. I think in particular, capital outlay is often, depending on what the expenditure is for, is often one time or a shorter period of time. And I think I heard Jack starting to chime in too, so he may have an answer for you as well.
Thank you, Sia. And I definitely understand your question a little bit better just because I used to be working for an organization that you currently work for, and that's an organization that actually stress a lot about the differentiating the one-time and the ongoing cost. And that hasn't been a practice here at Washington County in the past, is we do not try to differentiate it within the budget document of the operating and the ongoing and the one-time cost. But Sia is absolutely right that we do have that in the operations and in mind. It's just that that hasn't been something that we try to address in the budget document.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scouten?
No, I have no
Wait a
questions
second,
at this
wait a
time.
second.
I wanted to indicate that.
Jennifer, I can relate to that difference, having joined this organization from Metro, and there's a very different budget format used here. So there's a little bit of a culture shock, so to speak. But please be
this works
assured,
fine.
please be assured that every question is a good question. Commissioner Scouten.
I have no questions at this time. Thanks.
I don't know that any other folks have questions, so we'll move on then.
Thank you. Moving on to the functional area of public safety and justice. With 993.20 proposed FTE, that represents an overall increase in 1.45 FTE in the proposed budget. You can see that the $214 million in the proposed budget represents general fund, the local option levy, special funds, and the enhanced sheriff's patrol district, or ESPD. This overall budget increases by 3%. The pie chart breaks down the percentage of total budget, with the sheriff's office accounting for 63% of the total, community corrections at 14%, and the district attorney and juvenile departments representing 9% and 6% respectively. The local option levy administration accounts for 7% of the budget. The small sliver represents the law library and justice court, which make up about 1% of the public safety and justice budget. A couple of items to note on the special funds, the local option levy, and the enhanced sheriff's patrol district. You heard Mr. Rhodes previously talk about the public safety local option levy, which again expires June 30th of 2021, so not until the end of the next fiscal year. And voters will determine the outcome of the replacement levy this next week on May 19th. The enhanced sheriff's patrol district is in year 3 of its 5-year levy cycle, and it will expire June 30th of 2023. Both funding streams are an integral part of our public safety and justice system and help provide services in keeping with the growth and needs of the county. Next slide, please. The sheriff's office. This year's proposed budget keeps the sheriff's office pretty flat and does limit growth in some program areas. Materials and services are reduced to current year levels or lower. After an extensive 18-month analysis on workload and overtime in the jail, the sheriff's office made a decision to implement a more effective shift structure and move to a 4 10-hour schedule. This shift in staffing was thought to be good for staff in terms of work-life balance, which would likely enhance their health and wellness and again impact those in custody that they're working with. It's also hoped that it would result in decreasing the amount of required overtime. As I understand it, the sheriff's office had just made this change about 2 weeks prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact on business operations and staffing levels. The Public Safety Training Center, which opened in July of 2019, has become a premier training facility and has provided unique opportunities to host training with regional partners and interagency teams. This budget includes equipment and supplies needed to operate the facility to its full capacity. The Sheriff's Office Forensic Unit was accredited in January of this year. and the proposed budget includes annual accreditation costs and the required case management system. Recruitment and retention continue to be an area of focus for the Sheriff's Office. Their outreach and marketing staff are working with a lens on diversity, both locally and outside the state of Oregon, to include criminal justice students and current military members. Next slide, please. The District Attorney's Office has seen an increase in workload across a broad range of categories. This, combined with several recently passed legislative mandates around changes to juvenile prosecution, modified murder statutes, and plea offer practices, just to name a few, all stretch current resources at the District Attorney's Office. The Domestic Violence Unit was formed in 2019 in response to the increase in cases and illustrate the dedicated effort, attention, and prosecution of these cases and services to victims. Charged cases have increased by more than 37% in the year since the team was formed. Child abuse cases, another caseload priority for the District Attorney's Office, has also increased by more than 30% in the past 3 years. And like many departments, the District Attorney's Office recognizes several priorities ahead, and they're committed to doing the best they can to further stretch their resources. Managing digital evidence. You can imagine the proliferation of digital evidence with the increased use of smartphones, tablets, and computers. And this takes time and resources to process and manage. In partnership with other stakeholders, the DA's office are committed to continue working with a number of the specialty and treatment courts, such as drug court, mental health court, and veterans treatment court. There's also work being done to develop a rapid aid and assist docket that could help mitigate the backup of adults in custody waiting for evaluations. And there are currently 47 unsolved homicide cases in Washington County dating back to 1968. The district attorney would like to invest resources in working to investigate and potentially solve as many cases as possible. This will take a dedicated investigator. This is not in the proposed budget, but the hope is to look at other funding opportunities such as a grant. And the district attorney's office is at risk of reduced state funding for their child support enforcement division. Next slide, please. The juvenile department was able to add an assistant director during this current fiscal year to provide support to department operations and initiatives. They also reclassified a division manager position to a supervisor to provide dedicated support to a specialized team that handles the highest and fastest growing caseloads. In the budget preparation exercise that Sia mentioned earlier, the juvenile department had to reduce FTE by 1 juvenile counselor 1 to be in line with the direction given by the county. They are also experiencing a stretch in resources to handle workload increase as part of the legislative change in juvenile prosecution, which returns jurisdiction to juvenile court for certain cases for processing and case planning. The juvenile department is committed to doing their work through a diversity, equity, and inclusion and trauma-informed lens. They've made significant investments in contracting with providers to ensure delivery of culturally responsive services and recruiting a more diverse workforce to reflect the community they serve. This important work serves to impact and reduce the overrepresentation of youth and of color in the juvenile justice system. And the juvenile department, as you recall from the state slide, the partnership slide, is also at risk of losing state funding. Next slide, please. Conciliation Services operates as an arm of the juvenile department. They provide state-mandated services, providing mediation and counseling to divorcing parents regarding the custody of their children. They are funded through domestic relations court filing fees and marriage license fees that go to the state, but a portion is returned to Washington County through the Oregon Judicial Department at a rate set by the legislature. The amount given to Washington County has not increased in 10 years, while the costs of staffing the program have definitely increased. And conciliation is at risk of state reductions. Next slide, please. Community Corrections has had an interesting journey for this current fiscal year that will likely continue through the next fiscal year. In 2019, the legislature did not adopt a full funding package, and this resulted in the closure of a treatment dorm at the Community Correction Center and a reduction in felony services and FTE. The proposed budget includes reductions in staff and felony services while maintaining current service levels for the increasing misdemeanor caseloads. The funding that comes from the state primarily funds felony supervision, whereas county general fund primarily supports misdemeanor supervision. Since 2017, misdemeanor caseloads have increased by 55%. The general fund has remained flat since fiscal year 2008, which has stretched resources far beyond the recommended caseload size in their work with medium and high-risk individuals. Upon analysis and review of the numbers, this year's proposed budget provides additional general fund support to respond to the increase in caseload. And has been mentioned, community corrections is also at risk of reduced state funding. Next slide, please. The law library provides equal access availability to legal information and resources. It is governed by the Board of Commissioners in consult with the presiding judge and advised by the Law Library Committee. The law library receives an annual appropriation from the Oregon Judicial Department that is also set by the legislature. In recent years, this funding has been steadily decreasing, and the law library has utilized part of their fund balance to make their budget and services whole. The law library is also at risk of state reduction. And rounding out the public safety and justice functional areas, the Justice Court. Justice Court is the only court administered by the county and has an elected justice of the peace. Justice Court has seen an overall decrease in revenue over the past 4 years. There's also been a reduction in citations being issued over the same time period. During this current fiscal year, there's been some reorganization of administrative staff and the addition of one position, which will give better oversight to the program. And do you have any questions? Next slide, sorry. Any questions for public safety and justice?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Scouten has a question.
Certainly. Commissioner Scouten, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I want to make sure that I understood that big increase in misdemeanors. Can you repeat or perhaps further detail what that particular category is and why has there been such a large increase in a relatively short period of time?
I can certainly give it a try, Commissioner Scouten, and
Thank
I may
you.
call on my expert in the audience if we need some more details provided. My understanding is that, so first, actually, would you like me to repeat the information on the percentage increase, or what did you want something repeated? Okay.
Well, I know you said there was an increase of 55%, and just to sort of refresh my recollection of what I just heard, what aspect of misdemeanor are we talking about? The entire prosecution of misdemeanors, or what is this about, and why such a large increase?
My understanding is it's generally person-to-person misdemeanors, sex crimes, domestic violence, assaults, misdemeanor assault.
Okay.
And clearly, you know, public safety and justice works hand in hand. And so if the district attorney's office is prosecuting more cases and they've seen a caseload increase,
Okay.
that's going to trickle down to community corrections supervision.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see, any other members of our Zoom attending budget committee with questions? Kevin's shaking his head no. How about in the room? Seeing none, I just have one. It's not a budget question. Rather, I just want to put a mark into the CAO as a future policy opportunity with the board, with the Justice Court on, there are some potential policy opportunities we could develop here in the county that could benefit our community from a safety standpoint and also ensure cost coverage and possible revenue opportunities specific to the operations of the Justice Court. But that's not a budget appropriate conversation. Rather, it's one of those topics for our legislative planning for board engagement. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, I will now turn it over to Ruth Osuna.
Before we get started with the next session, would the budget committee like to do a time check and make a decision if we want to continue with the service district for lighting? That's the last part. So we still have 3 more operating functional areas and 3 more non-operating functional areas to go. So that's 6 functional areas plus service district for lighting. So you can see that as 7 major pieces, and we're at almost 5 to 8 over here. So I think it's safe for us to say that we may not be able to get through everything tonight by 8:30. Would the committee like to make a decision to reconvene? We'll go through 8:30, but would the committee like to make a decision to reconvene on the 18th so we can dismiss the service district for lighting staff for tonight?
Yes, so I think that we definitely will need to have an additional meeting of this budget committee? Do we need to adopt that, or the fact that we've set that up is sufficient?
No, I think we can just stop at 8:30, and then I think that will just give the cue to some staff that don't have to stay till the end without having an opportunity to present, so they
Do
can
we
come back
want
on the
to
18th.
continue through the order that's in the presentation, or are you suggesting that, given that we have about a half an hour, that your sense is that we could dispatch the service district for lighting the
My
topic, or just release the staff?
right, my recommendation would be continue with the current presentation flow.
Okay, so all of you staff members that are here for service district for lighting,
So I have a
Thank you.
question before you dismiss them. If we were to go till 9 o'clock, could we get it all done tonight and not have to meet on Monday?
I don't think so.
It's unlikely, I have to say. It'll get us close.
We were trying.
I love it that you're the one who asked that question when you were saying 8:29.
I know it. I just had just positive hope. All right.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for bringing it up. Oh, let's
Okay.
keep going.
Chair, members of the Budget Committee, my name is Ruth Osuna, and I'm going to begin with land use and transportation. Within the land use and transportation budget, there are 13 organizational units dedicated to addressing growth while managing issues of community livability, the environment, and maintaining the quality of life. The budget totals a little over $128 million, which is down from last year's budget of approximately $135 million. Revenues to support this area include the road fund, which is the largest fund at almost $46 million, taxes, licenses, and permits, fees, state funding. General fund provides some support in the amount of $1.2 million for community planning. The budget was developed as all of the areas were before the impact of COVID. And so some of the estimates in the revenue have held steady to staff's projections, but we are now being more cautious as it is now some signs that we are seeing that things are going to slow down and the activity and the revenue will slow. So I may touch on that a little bit while I am talking. I am now on page 124, 125. If you could go to the next slide. I'm going to be talking about long-range planning. Right now, we are maintaining the current service levels while community planning remains level with a slight increase of 4%. The transportation planning area budget decreases by 32% as a result of a reduction in grants. Last year, we had a very robust year of grants. We had over $700,000 coming in, and we don't see that coming in this next year. A reduction in expenditures for materials and services corresponds with that reduction in grant funding because we will not be needing those consultant services. The road fund shows a modest increase attributed to county vehicle registration fee receipts and state highway fund apportionment revenue. However, this was pre-COVID. Revenues are currently forecasted to come in a little over $65 million. We're watching this fund very closely. As I said before, we're seeing some of the revenue streams slow down. When this budget was prepared, revenue streams were coming in strong, and as of March, they appeared steady, but in April and May, we are now beginning to see a little bit of that slowdown. The road fund includes several LUT organizational units, including Road Fund Administration, Engineering Services, LUT Administration, Operations and Maintenance, and Capital Project Management. The largest of those expenditures is for personnel services at 31%. The Road Fund Administration budget shows a 62% increase in expenditures for materials and services, and this is offset by a transfer in the Major Streets Transportation Improvement
Fund, which we fondly call MISTIP. And this is for projects which include Highway 26 corridor study, the community rating system, Tualatin Watershed Enhancement Collaborative, and a continuation of the update of our road standards. In our current planning and building services, which are operated as enterprise funds, we are expecting to continue the revenues to decline since as an enterprise fund, all of the fees are expected to cover all of the operating expenses. And while we are seeing activity levels right now have not dropped substantially in the last 2 months, staff is exercising an abundance amount of caution going forward and into this coming fiscal year. The majority of the $3.1 million of the current planning budget is fee-driven. This is about 77% of the total budget. A very small amount of general funds supports this critical county service, and $299,200 in video lottery contributes to this budget amount, and that goes primarily for code enforcement. The division has a reserve fund that is increasingly being depleted. The monthly reserve fund contributes between $60,000 and $70,000 a month to cover expenses at this point. Due to the expected decrease in revenues, 3 vacant positions have been removed from the FY 2020-21 budget, plus 2 variable hour positions. Similarly, in building services, which is also fee-driven, revenues are decreasing due to the slowdown of developments, and the current reserve fund is being depleted at a rate of approximately $200,000 monthly to cover these expenses. 4 vacant positions have been removed from next year's budget, plus 2 temporary positions. And even with these cautionary measures that we are already taking, at the current rate of expenditures, fund balances for current planning and building services will continue to decline, even with proposed fee increases that will be coming to the board in June. Once the fiscal year 2020-21 budget is completed, staff will be proposing a plan to manage revenues over expenditures going forward, and we expect to come back to the Board of Commissioners in July. Next slide. Any questions?
Whoops, let me get my cheat sheet out. Kevin, are there any raised hands? Anyone here in the room? Nope. Great.
While you're flipping, this is Roy. I wanted to say, Ruth, that was a good presentation. I really appreciate the abundance of concern on those fees. In talking development community, if they didn't have a large inventory on hand right now, they would be building practically nothing. And I shouldn't say large; to them, it's very, very small. But the environment just isn't really conducive to a lot of building right now. So I appreciate we're going to have to really manage, and I understand the concern you're having about the declining revenues. I'm hoping that sometime in the 21, maybe second quarter to the third quarter, that it's going to pick back up again. But anyway, good work.
Thank you. Thank you to the LUT staff that helped me here. Thank you. Next slide, we'll go on to Housing, Health, and Human Services. This is a huge department, and
well, it's actually 2 departments.
Yeah, well, several departments,
Yeah.
and many
That's
of these,
true.
and I'm not going to say COVID has impacted the entire organization, but a lot of what is happening with COVID is falling into these departments, particularly HHS and Housing and Community Development. So, and remember that this budget was done pre-COVID, and it doesn't include any new money coming in from COVID. That's a separate discussion that will be coming to the Board of Commissioners later on. This area includes 416 employees, and we are proposing an increase of 14 new positions. The total budget of these areas is $245 million, almost $246 million. And this is mostly special funds with some general funds in the budget. The Washington, as I said, the Washington COVID response is being led by Public Health and supported by many of the operational units included in this section. And I appreciate all of the staff time and all of the hard work that they've been doing in the last few months, in addition to preparing the budget. So next slide.
If I could just add, the note, you noted that the high proportion of special fund funding. In this budget proposal, it's almost 86% of the funding for this consolidated budget unit is from special funds versus general funds at only 14.2%.
Thank you. Public health.
Ruth, if I could just ask,
Sure.
Last time you gave us a page that we could start on.
Oh,
Is there a page for Health and Human Services? I
Yes,
don't have to-
page 157
Thank you.
is the public health.
154 is the consolidated one.
Yes.
So now she's going just to public health.
Okay, thank you.
The Public Health Division includes emergency medical services, environmental health, disease control and prevention, the medical legal death investigators, maternal, child, and reproductive health, health equity and policy and planning, along with public health administration. Also includes included in this division is vital records and the women, infants, and children WIC, and the public health emergency preparedness. I'm just going to highlight some new things that are going to be occurring in this division. First, the division will be leading the efforts related to the Tobacco Retail Licensure Program, or the TRL, which is anticipated to be launched on July 1. Revenues are expected to increase due to the implementation of the TRL, and you'll be hearing that in front of the Board of Commissioners in the next month. So, new state legislation passed in the last session requires public health, early learning hubs, and/or tribes to lead implementation of a universally offered nurse home visiting program called Family Connects. Through Family Connects, all women who give birth are offered a nurse home visit, whether they are public or privately insured, and this start date will be January 2021. And we will be having to hire, I think it was six to eight new nurses just for this program. This year's budget also supports school-based health centers that were prioritized by the Board of Commissioners in last year's budget. And the WIC program has been significantly impacted by COVID, but currently it provides nutrition, education, supplemental food, and community referrals to approximately 9,000 Washington County residents. And I know during this period, we've had an extremely high number of new clients coming in the door. Last year, or in this current fiscal year, we made an investment to create the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program, which oversees public health emergency preparedness and assists HHS with the preparedness expertise. It's a great program. However, we need to watch this closely because there is a proposed reduction of state funding for this program. Development disabilities.
Whoops, before you switch to
Sure.
developmental disabilities, I would just like to add, to share with the Budget Committee that as I've really tried to dig in and get more familiar with the whole triple HS section of this budget, and with what everything that's been going on with COVID, but even for my year and a quarter time here as a commissioner, just really digging in, trying to better understand the triple HS aspect of the business. One thing that has struck me is how over the decades we have, as a nation, underfunded public health. And I think this is an area that we need to really protect from cuts. I don't want to cut anything in our budget, but the fact that we have not kept pace with our community needs, with this COVID disaster that we're experiencing, we've had the unfortunate opportunity to see how social determinants of health are showing through this crisis. Poverty, lack of health care, lack of proactive, I can't remember what the Obamacare term was, preventive health care, there we go, and so forth. So, you know, just like I have a fire lit under me on community corrections funding with the state, so too, I have a fire lit under my derriere around public health funding. So I just wanted to share that with my fellow Budget Committee colleagues. Thank you. Now onward to developmental
Okay.
disabilities.
Page 169, if you're following along in your book. 168, 169. Fund 191 was created when it was moved from Human Services Administration, or Fund 192. This program has continued to grow as new community members were deemed eligible for services. So the definition expanded, and so now we're seeing an expansion of clients. Currently, the county is adding the equivalent of 1 FT in caseloads every 2 months. To effectively serve community members, the program has determined it needs to increase staffing using carry-forward dollars. This program will add 3 additional FTE to assist with increasing case management loads to effectively serve the family. And when we're serving the family, we're not only serving the individual with a development disability, we're actually serving the entire family. Human Services, what, page 170? Human Services, and I'm going to focus in on the mental health and addictions, since there are new investments in this part of the county system of care. But I'm going to start off with saying that there is a decrease in revenues of approximately $7.5 million due to the Development Disability Services Program being administratively moved to a new fund and organization unit. So we moved it into 191 when we created the Development Disability Services unit. This adjustment results in a decrease in carry-forward revenues, interfund revenues, and interfund expenditures that were budgeted in the prior year. This fund supports community mental health programs. These community-based services include crisis response, jail diversion, indigent treatment, care coordination, residential services, and system management. Fund 192 includes $400,000 in interest revenue, which is tracked separately. The reason we're tracking that separately is because it will allow this specific revenue to invest in supportive housing services to serve individuals with mental illness or addictions and to provide them a way for independent living and in housing. Fund 192 also includes approximately $900,000 from the marijuana tax revenue, which is reserved for specific projects that provide substance abuse services. Any questions? Next slide. Now, Chair Harrington, if you spent a lot of time looking at the HHHS program, this is where it gets confusing. So I'll try to explain this a little bit, and if I need to have Marnie come up here and rescue me, I will call upon her. I'm going to start off with talking about the Health Share of Oregon, Fund 195, on page 175. This fund is no longer, is now called the Coordinated Care Organization, or the CCO 2.0. So beginning in January of 2020, Washington County's role in Health Share changed significantly, leading to the development of a new fund, Fund 203, or CCO 2.0, to ensure that funds are managed in accordance with contractual requirements. As a result, this fund has a small amount of revenue to support a single care coordinator staff. So what we did is we left one staff person and we moved a significant number over to another area. So this leaves the fund with a significant fund balance that you will see. Washington County is required to retain a portion of the funds to pay expenses incurred but not received. So we always need to have that reserve there. However, most of the fund balance may be used to invest in community behavioral health services that are aligned with the original contract. Fund 203, CCO 2.0, pays a large portion of the behavioral health program staff, plus a few contracted services with community-based organizations. Unlike the previous contract with Health Share Oregon, Washington County bears no risk for clinical treatment service costs under the new contract with Health Share, Care Oregon, and Trillium. Funds received under these contracts pay primarily for care, coordination, crisis services, and other county-based supports. Most of the remaining funds will be invested in the Center for Addictions Triage and Treatment, or Center project, which we called CAT. And I think that the board has received a presentation on that, and currently there is a lot of planning going on. Substance use disorder treatment services are significantly lacking in Washington County, and residents often must leave the county to access these services. So we've taken those reserves and we set them aside, so you will see that large amount of money sitting there. But we've got a plan. Mental health crisis services, page 180. Are delivered through the Hawthorne Walk-In Center. And the center provides services as a mental health urgent care center through a contractual agreement with LifeWorks Northwest. Face-to-face behavioral health crisis services are provided for the county. Any questions before I move on?
Kevin's not flagging me down, so it looks like we're good. Nobody's flagging me down in the room.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Community development. Page 163. The Community Development Block Grant Block Grant Fund, or CDBG, is primarily federally funded. It assists to improve the quality of life for low to moderate income Washington County residents through a variety of programs related to housing and community development. It manages the CDBG program on behalf of the Urban County and its 9-city CDBG consortium members. In fact, they're having a meeting tonight. The program provides funding for housing and community development needs, technical assistance, and planning. There's a modest increase in funding of about $659,000. Community development will be receiving another $250,000 from the state of Oregon to support a nonprofit's work to expand home ownership for families low to moderate income. And these will be pass-through funds and increases the expenditures in materials and services in the same amount. There's also some expenditures in the other category, which is increased by 13% or $380,000 approximately. This category includes all of the CDBG and ESG funded items that are either capital construction or public service projects. Included are some large construction projects in the cities of Banks, Gadsden, Tigard, Cornelius, and Forest Grove, and a large facility project for the National Alliance on Mental Illness located in Aloha. I just wanted to note to the Budget Committee that the Office of Community Development will be receiving a significant amount of funding from the federal government to assist in the response to COVID-19. These funds are not reflected in this budget. They will be coming to the board at a later time for acceptance and appropriation.
But I would like to note that we're really fortunate to have such an expert team to be able to put those dollars to swift use and according to all the complicated requirements.
I'd also like to add to that they are reviewing that process tonight. I had a long conversation with Jenny Proctor this morning, so I'm up to speed as a member of that group as well. So thank you for your comments.
Yep. Thanks for being our rep.
I have a question on that.
Yes, Jennifer, go ahead.
Just my question is, so if there's going to be possible, CARES Act or COVID fund dollars going to this, will there be a reduction in the general fund transfer that goes to this community development block grant?
Probably not. That would just be special fund revenue.
Yes. And currently the general fund transfer is targeted for fair housing, training, and services, as well as working on expanding affordable housing, primarily in the manufactured housing area, and also assisting with the Metro Affordable Housing Bond Program.
I had a question. This is federal money, none of this is state money.
It's federal money. The $250,000 to promote home ownership is state money.
Oh.
And then general fund.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Talk a little bit about the home fund, which is on page 189. This is also a federal program, which the county receives about just a little over $4.3 million in federal funding. The Office of Community Development manages the Home Investment Partnership Program, or what we call HOME. And the county and its 11 home consortium members decide on how to spend that money for new construction, acquisition, and/or rehabilitation of rental housing and home ownership. Any questions? Next slide. Housing services. Housing services.
184.
184.
Housing services administers the housing authority programs, which are federally funded, countywide homeless programs, and supports the implementation of the Metro Affordable Housing Bond Program. Just want to share a few things that the Housing Services Department does every day. Because every night, approximately 2,650 families have a place to call home. The department also provides shelter for 200 hard-to-house individuals and families who were previously homeless, and they own 650 units of affordable housing. And they are right on the cusp of implementing the Metro Affordable Housing Bond Program, where over 800 new affordable housing units will be developed in the next 5 to 7 years. And they're also on the forefront of developing supportive services to wrap around, to put people into affordable housing, particularly those very, very low income folks that are at 30% or below of median income. The Housing Services Department also, like I said, is implementing the Affordable Housing Bond Program. And there is an $80 million notice of funding availability on the street as we speak. We will be receiving those responses on May the 26th or the 27th, that Tuesday after the holiday. Also, the budget reflects a continuation of $4 million in general fund support, and this was something that the board supported last year, and we continue that this year.
So is that $4 million, that's not $4 million of additional revenue this year, rather that's the continuing to set aside that $4 million?
That's $4 million for this year. Because of the budget, there is, in the current fiscal year, we have $4 million. We will only be spending $2 million of that by June 30th. Therefore, the $2 million was used for other programs, and this is a new $4 million.
Wow.
So you didn't expend $4 million last year?
Right.
You only expended $2 million for this purpose. You didn't carry forward that $2 million.
Correct, we did not.
Interesting. Interesting bookkeeping. Okay. So you had to reallocate. Whoa, I'm confused, but I'll catch up with it offline.
Okay. Next slide. Any questions?
Yeah, this is Roy. I have one. Refresh my memory on how the potential 17% cut in the state will affect HHS. Is my timing off, and is that the next biennium or next year, or when is exactly that going to happen? And have we factored any of that into these numbers?
No, we haven't factored in, because that 17% is just a request from the governor to state departments. It hasn't been adopted yet.
Right.
So with that in mind, if indeed that does happen, I'm not suggesting it will, or hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, there's going to be a mid-year budget adjustment? Is that what's going to be proposed?
Yes, indeed. That would be the ripple effect.
So I guess the net takeaway from this conversation is that the budget committee may need to come back into, I guess, together again anyway, mid-year for economic reasons, meaning that if any of those projections that the economist said don't materialize the way he thinks they might, or if there is any state cuts, we shouldn't assume that this is a one and done. We may need to reconvene.
We have a lot of known unknowns at this point, so.
Agreed.
Nothing is certain, so we can't say for certain, but there are all kinds of possibilities. Chief, CAO?
I would just reiterate what I mentioned in my opening remarks, is that we expect to revisit this budget in 2 to 3 months. Those are some of the factors that will bring that.
Thank you.
Plus, we get to meet on Monday.
Yes, and we get to meet on Monday.
Things could be all different by Monday, you don't know.
Oh, it's 8:29.
True story.
That's right. Are there any more questions on Zoom? Because we are at that magic hour of 8:29. No, the clock. Are there any other questions in the room? Well, without further ado, do we have a motion to adjourn tonight's Budget Committee meeting and reconvene on Monday? And we'll pick back up with Culture, Education, and Recreation.
Yes, I so move.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 Can I
Any
make one quick?
opposed?
Can I make one comment? Ruth, I really appreciated the fact that you kept referring to page numbers, and if we could have that
Yes.
Yes.
continuation for the Monday night thing, it really helps a lot to be able to know where we're going on this.
Yes. Okay. Do we meet here Monday? Same
We
place?
do. Meet here Monday evening, 5:30.
5:30.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all of your flexibility and nimbleness. Stay healthy. Talk to you Monday. Bye-bye.
Oh my gosh, I got all my.
So we're going to start on,
I just forgot to say no.
Culture, Education, and Recreation.
yeah.
Page 71.